Okay, I'm going to convene this meeting of the City Council of the City of Bellingham to order for the afternoon session. However, we're going to do things a little differently this afternoon and go into executive session first because we have some items we need to cover before Committee of the Whole. Executive session is closed to the public. I'll report out in the regular meeting. There are two items during this executive session. The first is potential litigation and property acquisition. The second is potential litigation. Executive session is expected to last approximately 20 minutes, after which time we will return to the chambers and convene the Committee of the Whole meeting, and so that will be approximately 1:20. Thank you. Let's call this meeting to order of the Bellingham City Council Committee of the Whole. We just completed a brief executive session. We'll report out on those items this evening. We have a number of items in Committee of the Whole this afternoon, and then we'll have a budget work session as our final item today. First up, A resolution declaring that the acquisition of property known as the Aloha Motel property is necessary to eliminate neighborhood blight. This resolution declares that the city's acquisition of property located at 301 and 315 North Samish Way, commonly known as the Aloha Motel, is necessary to eliminate neighborhood blight pursuant to RCW 35.80A. Mayor Kelly Linville has determined that the Aloha Motel is a threat to the public health, safety, or welfare. The mayor's determination is supported by declarations submitted by the Bellingham Police Department, the Whatcom County Health Department, and neighboring business owners and residents describing the violent crimes, prostitution, illegal drug activity, and methamphetamine contamination present and occurring on the property. Upon passage of this resolution, Council will consider an ordinance authorizing the City Attorney's Office to take all necessary actions to acquire the property through eminent domain proceedings or voluntary agreement, if possible. And I'll turn it over to City Attorney Peter Raffato.
Thank you. So just to briefly go over what's in the packet and the decision before you, as this agenda item and the next agenda item are ultimately to gain council approval to proceed with condemnation proceedings against the Aloha Motel property. The reason that we have both a resolution and an ordinance is because we're operating under two different statutes. The condemnation for blight statute calls for a resolution by City Council declaring the property to be matching two of the three criteria in that statute. And then the ordinance is necessary because there's a reference to the general condemnation ordinance for cities. And if it's okay with council, I'll just talk about these agenda items together, and then we can have two separate motions, both this afternoon and this evening, if that's the council's desire. In terms of the process to date, this final action today required notice to be provided to the landowners, which was done. It required 15 days notice. And along those lines, even it's not a public hearing, but the landowners have an opportunity to make comment during the public comment period. And I have not talked to the property owners or council on this particular topic. You may, if they're here and you want to take specific comment right before that agenda item, that's an option tonight as well. But they are aware that the final action is scheduled for tonight. The other process item that has occurred to date is that Mayor Linville has made an executive determination that the property is a threat to public health and safety. And that is one of the requirements under the condemnation for blight statute. In terms of the process for today, the council should be considering the evidence in the record in making its determination. Again, for this evening, there's an opportunity for the landowners to provide comment, and then tonight we will have the final action would not occur until tonight. And because there is an opportunity for the landowners to comment, I would ask that for your committee meeting that your motion simply be to move that final action be taken tonight and not make a positive or negative determination at the committee level, because you, in case they want to make some comment that you want to consider tonight. That isn't absolutely necessary, but that's one way to look at it. In terms of the substance, I would just like to, you have a lot of detail in the record, but in terms of the substance in meeting the criteria, the council needs to find that two elements in the statute are met, and that goes both in terms of the threat to health and safety, and that there's been drug activity associated with the property in the last 12 months. And is highlighting some of the information from the declarations. You have, first and foremost, that there's been methamphetamine testing that's resulted in the closure of 11 rooms, and an update to the record. I think there was only 10 actually in the declaration, but even since putting this packet together, room 23 was found on October 10th, 2014 to have levels of contamination that is 620 times the legally allowed limit. We had a homicide In December 2013, 4 drug overdoses, 1 resulting in death, a decomposing body found where death had occurred 6 days prior. That was in September of this year. And only 20 days ago, after it was already public what the city's direction was on this, there was a controlled purchase of methamphetamine on the property. And I would just refer the council to both the quantitative and qualitative information that's contained in the record. And finally, the observations by and the impact to the local property owners and neighbors. There are several examples, but one of the salient ones is that bags of drug needles were being left on a neighboring property, even when that property owner requested that that not occur anymore. So that really is the substance that supports the executive determination as well as the resolution, if the council so chooses. And then the ordinance, really all that adds to the action would be that it does identify the Low-Income Housing Fund as a source of revenue, but allows flexibility in that regard. And it is, it's set up as an emergency ordinance, which would require 5 votes of council and a finding that it's necessary for the immediate preservation of the public, peace, health, or safety, again, based on the record. So we'll be looking for 2 motions in committee, but again, that the motion really be to recommend that council take final action on the resolution tonight, and then a second motion move to recommend that council take final action on the ordinance tonight. And are there any questions?
Michael?
As an emergency ordinance, does that mean we'll have to have a post-vote hearing as we have in other cases?
No, that process you're thinking of is with respect to land emergency zoning ordinances, which require a public hearing within 60 days, and this is not under that particular process.
Okay. Any other questions from the council? Seeing none.
So the motion would be to
bring this forward for final action tonight, and I would just ask to keep it clean, since one's a resolution and one's an emergency ordinance, to have 2 motions, one bringing forward the resolution tonight for final action, and really an identical motion for the ordinance.
I move we bring the resolution forward tonight for a vote.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Moving on to our ordinance.
Me too.
Yeah.
I move that we bring forward the ordinance tonight.
Second.
I didn't read through this description. Do you think that I need to?
No, I think it's covered adequately. I think it would be good to actually read just the title of the ordinance would
Sure.
be a good thing.
Okay, so the second item is an ordinance providing for the City of Bellingham to acquire by eminent domain certain real property known as the Aloha Motel for the purpose of eliminating neighborhood blight. We have a motion and a second to bring this ordinance forward for action, for final action tonight. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion passes 7-0. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our third item this afternoon. License for an interim public trail between Bellwether Bay and the ASB Marina Trail. In December of 2013, the city and the Port of Bellingham adopted the Waterfront District Sub-Area Plan. The plan contemplates an interim off-road trail connection between Bellwether Bay and the ASB Marina Trail, which will eventually become permanent. On October 21st, 2014, the Port Commission approved the grant of a license to the city, allowing the city to construct and maintain the interim public trail. Council approval is needed to authorize the mayor to enter into the license agreement. And I'll turn it over to James King.
Hi, thank you, James King, Parks and Recreation Department. So, if I can make this work.
Look at that. Huh?
Wow,
Man,
amazing. So, as you just read, we're moving forward with this part of the trail. The concept is to come from Bellwether Way. The existing trail comes along the waterfront here and then comes out to the road, goes along the sidewalk, and there's an existing gravel trail that comes to this point. So our intention is to build a trail where the red line is, connecting from the end of this trail right here out, coming around the end of the waterway there, brief or a small parking area here for 10 vehicles, connecting over here, coming up the hill to get up onto the same level as the ASB. So this would be a graded trail coming up here. We'd put a fence along here to keep us separate, or keep pedestrians separate from the vans and things that are there associated with the various businesses in the building here. Then there would be an access down to the beach here, an additional fence that goes along that would keep people from being able to enter the boat storage area there, but be able to enjoy the beach. And then the trail would come on out here to this point, to the Inner Harbor line. Beyond that, I believe you're aware that Georgia Pacific still holds the lease out there, so we can't take the trail out there at this time. So the concept, again, would be to come all the way out to here with that trail. In order to do that, we need a lease from the port, and that's what's before you today.
Okay, we have any questions? Jean?
What kind of fencing on the lagoon side? It's just chain link fencing?
It is chain link fence, and if I remember right, it's 6 feet tall.
Roxanne?
Can I hold a little bit of hope that we'll get an agreement in the future to extend the trail? For the
I'm with
GP
you.
side?
I'm hoping to extend it in the future.
Okay, great, thank you.
Jack?
So this is the first time I've been told about the fact that we can't go around. When did we find out?
So last spring, when we were working hard to develop this trail and open it up to the public, we discovered that the tip, this piece that's beyond the Inner Harbor line, so it's kind of that point that sticks out here, it's DNR land, and Georgia Pacific still holds the lease for that piece of it. So Georgia Pacific doesn't want a trail on it. So that part needs to be worked out, and that's an issue that the port would be working on. In the interim, we decided it was important to get people out there at least as far as we could.
What would be any possible reason that GP would not want to have that? That really
Doesn't make sense.
doesn't make sense.
Mayor Linville?
So this was a surprise to everyone about this, because as we first planned it, we were under the impression that we could do what they've been doing always, which is walking around the whole ASB. And the truth is, at some point, you could also go the other way. We haven't planned that. But that very point is where the outfall is, that belonged to Georgia Pacific. The port purposely did not take that part of the ASB under their control because of the contamination factor that was there. So it was a disappointment to everyone, I think especially me, who've been leading tours out there for about a summer. So there's nobody more disappointed than I am that that is not working out. Now, the reason that we still want to proceed with what we can do, and the port is taking care of the ASB trail part, we are taking care of the city trail part, is because of the opportunity to get out on the water, just one more opportunity to get out on the water. Obviously not the same expense or experience as we were hoping for, but it allows people to get out there, still be able to view the site across the waterway, and even though it's not as robust an experience as we were hoping for, I think it's still worth it to do because we establish a connection to the water again that we've been trying to do for people. And there's also then the access to that little beach that's it's right there. So it's just an expansion of what we can already do on the Bellwether site.
Jack?
So follow-up, we've approved $500,000 for building a trail, and with the idea that half of that was going to be used around the ASB, and then the other half was going to be for a future activity. This is the future activity, I think. Do you have a ballpark as to what the total cost would be to build what you're proposing today?
So we're still in the design stage. We're estimating somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000. It depends on the elevation change from here up to this site and what we need to do for a wall.
I'm sorry, James, I can't see where the cursor is.
Can you
It's
show that
really
again?
Sorry.
hard to see.
So here's the lower elevation, and then it comes over here, and there's a big retaining wall along here. So we need to be able to get up on that wall. And we're still working with the port because we're waiting for, we got to have the license before we can really finish the design. But we're deciding whether that's actually going to be an additional wall to allow the trail to go up there, or we'll be able to do a fill slope, and that's going to change the price significantly.
Okay.
Kathy?
Mayor?
The previous estimate was also based on going the other way through by the parking lot where we took people.
That's
So I
right.
think the previous estimate for what that red part of the trail would be is probably less expensive than what this is, but it didn't connect. It connected to Rotor, but it didn't connect to the rest of the Squalicum Harbor Trail.
Pinky?
I totally appreciate what we're trying to do here. There's part of me that thinks there's not very much water access to it. It just doesn't feel like a good use of funds. I feel like if we were going around the ASB, I've been on those walks with the mayor, and it's an amazing view. But the view around the backside, not so great. So I'm a little hesitant. I don't know, just sharing my thoughts.
Anyone else? Michael?
Those are good thoughts to share, and I agree. This is less than half of what we had hoped for. I know what the mayor had hoped for. So I want to ask about that future beach access and that little pocket beach area all along the bay. We've identified certain areas that create natural beaches due to the direction of the currents, and that's one of the locations. I'm trying to determine if that's kind of like a saving grace of this feature. If that $500,000, instead of going towards an ASB trail, might go towards accelerating that particular beach for development, because then that might be a benefit. Then we would have a rehabilitated beach for public access, hopefully cleaned up a little bit, good for hand-launched boats perhaps. I don't know. Director King, do you want to comment on that beach portion?
So yes, this project will have a trail down to the beach here, and I agree with you. It's a beautiful little beach, and we see it as a really neat asset to our waterfront to get people back onto the water in that area. That's why the fence would go along here, so that people wouldn't have easy access up into the boat storage. So I agree. I think that's an important part of this project. I also agree it is disappointing to not be able to go all the way around, but I think we really look at this as this is an interim action. This is a step in the right direction. No, it doesn't complete it as far as we'd like to, but it gets us going so that it kind of holds the pressure on us to keep working on it and try and figure it out into the future to make the complete loop.
Jerry?
Yeah, I kind of view this as we've done with some of our other trail systems when we were trying to link Lake Whatcom to the downtown. When we didn't have all the steps in there, but we would still, when the opportunity was there, we would go with the length of trail that we could get in, and with the hopes that we'll get the other part of it. This provides that, a link to it. When that's done, hopefully that we'll be able to have that full experience. But I still think it's a good it's a good opportunity to get that section that we wanted from the other trail system, especially if we can get to the little beach. But then it's there when the other happens, and then we can complete it. Then it becomes a really interesting trail system all the way around the water. So if you view it like we do on some of our others, like the greenways, some of the trails where we'll do the trail where we got it, and we know we'll work it out here sooner or later. And so I can support it.
Roxanne, and then the mayor has something to add.
I just think any trail is what the community makes of it. And so you can count on me taking selfies with nice backgrounds down there to help promote it. I mean, and the job I think we need to do is to promote this area, to get people used to hanging out down there, understanding it's safe, understanding it's a place to recreate and enjoy, because we're going to have a lot of work to do to convince people of that. So that's why I'm supporting even this segment of it.
Mayor?
So one of the other advantages is we had talked about the city doing the improvements to the ASB trail before. The port has now taken that on, so that the city is not responsible for that particular part. And the other issue is if you start where it says new gate, 16-foot opening right there at the head of the trail right there, the issue about coming all the way around to the other side of the line, which is that the line that comes down the harbor, inner harbor line, that also is nothing that is under DNR's purview. So the opportunity of being able to expand that sooner rather than later, what you have is the tip right at the very end that we have to basically negotiate either with, I say we, but if we're partnering with the port, with Department of Natural Resources, who could allow us to walk on the top of it if they chose to do it, because you can already drive cars there, which seems a little odd. You can drive cars but not walk. However, so while that looks a little limited, the opportunity to expand it to at least twice as much or more is the second easiest part to do. So I think once we had part of it, then we could work with the port to do the second part. It's not the same as walking around. I'd be the first one to say it's not the same. But I do believe, I think I agree with Terry and Roxanne that it's like, I don't think the perfect should get in the way of the good. I think it's a great opportunity. It's a partnership that we didn't have before, and I'd like to see us proceed with the limited amount of access that we'll have on the ASB for the increased access we're going to have through the port property.
James?
Thanks. So I agree. I think it's part of a system that's growing, as Terry pointed out. And the other thing that's important to note about this is it connects to the existing system. And we know we have a lot of people that drive down there just to walk around that facility. And this extends that ability to walk that much farther, which is exciting.
I'm going to add one thing quickly, Michael, and then you. Yeah, it's disappointing. Whatever, though. I mean, going out and around in a circle isn't the end-all, be-all of water access. We've all been on a pier, and that's very cool, too, right? However, I think the probably concern is we approved a certain amount of money to achieve a certain expectation. Now the expectation has changed. We still have the same amount of money approved. Let's not throw all of that available money at a lesser project, but it sounds like we're not going to. I also share Roxanne's belief that promoting this is a really important piece of it, and I imagine we're going to have some real robust, cool signage out on Rotor that would direct people how to use this beach access, which is a very unique asset that we're creating. Okay, getting head nods there.
Well, I do want to assure you about the cost, and that's why I brought up the fact that the port is partnering with us, because it doesn't have to cost $500,000 anymore.
Yeah, okay, great.
And we didn't, that was an estimate of what it would cost if we had to do the whole thing and the trail. So aside from the slope incline that we have to deal with, the project should not be as expensive.
Great. Michael?
I appreciate the fact that it won't be quite as expensive, but to me, it's still not worth it unless I get a clearer picture. I don't think I quite have it yet with regard to that beach. It will be a great asset one day, or it'll be a great asset in the near future. Do we need to do any remediation and rehabilitation before it becomes public access? How far away is that? Is there a chance of redeploying some of the $500,000 that what hopefully will be a substantial amount left over from that for the beach? Is that early in the sequence, or is it out in some future day unplanned?
So we're going to open it up so people can get to it as part of this project. So there would be a trail down to it. Now,
And we can open it up in its current state. It doesn't need...
That's right.
Okay.
Yes. Now, as far as in the future, if there's some changes maybe to enhance habitat or those sorts of things, that's something that would happen down the road. We would just give access to it. It's a beautiful little sandy beach. I don't know if you've been down there now, but it's very usable once you get people down there. The challenge is the way to get down there is to scramble across these huge boulders.
Right.
And so we would be creating a trail that makes it much easier for people to get down there.
Okay, so, yeah, if you don't have a boat, you were scrambling over boulders. Now we're going to let people in there. That sounds good.
But it's safe. There isn't, sharp objects down there, that sort of thing. It's a safe, clean place to be.
Okay. Michael and Roxanne, and then maybe we'll try and wrap
Kind of
this
some more
puppy up.
technical questions. On page 239, it refers to Exhibit B. This is the contract. So the contract and Exhibit B. We have no Exhibit B. It seems that Exhibit B in this contract refers to Exhibit A shown on the board. Is that correct?
So this is Exhibit B.
Yeah, and it's labeled Exhibit A. So
Yep,
Okay,
sorry.
that's fine. And then
We cut and pasted from another document.
I understand. For the actual contract, it'll be properly labeled. Has this agreement already been signed by the port?
Yes, it was last Tuesday they approved it.
Okay. And then I need to ask about it appears, Peter, that there's actually no specific performance in here for the city, and that the duration is the only termination clause, and that we have the right to abandon it any time we want. This is an awesome contract. We are required to do nothing and can end it whenever we want. And I'm surprised the port agreed to it. Am I reading it correctly?
Well, I suspect that the main interest the port has in this is the indemnification of the port.
Right. For all the recreation uses, that's, yeah. Okay. But the duration, I am reading that correctly, shall remain in full force until abandoned riding by the city, or until a permanent easement is granted by the port to the city. So this is really nice for us in the sense that backing out of this seems to be pretty easy. I don't know why we would, but am I reading it correctly?
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
Amy, did you want to add anything?
Okay, if we get a good deal.
I know, it's awesome.
Okay. I'd love to entertain a motion.
I would move to approve the license for an interim public trail.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roxanne?
Well, just a joke, but maybe with some idea behind it. Could we get a food truck down there?
Hey,
Maybe to
food
the
is no
beginning.
joke. Yeah. Okay, and we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on. We have our third quarter financial review. The city financial guidelines require our finance director to make a quarterly financial report to City Council. This report is an overview of the internal financial statements for the period ending September 30th, 2014, and is presented by City Finance Director Brian Henshaw. Welcome yet again, Brian. We see a lot of you these days. It's nice.
Thank you very much. I always like to follow the pretty pictures of parks, so I'll give you pretty graphs of the finance. Brian Henshaw, Finance Department. Today's presentation will be a brief summary. This is online along with our complete September financials, so we can go quickly through this. Please feel free to ask questions as I go. The first thing we usually show you is the general national headlines, economic indicators. changes daily. There's a lot of volatility in the markets, a lot of good news and bad news that changes basically daily. The good news is on the jobs and unemployment numbers are positive, and the bad news usually has to do with retail sales, which has been blamed on high gas prices over the summer. Leading into the fall, hopefully the lower gas prices, they're anticipating a growth in retail sales again. Locally, that's similar to what we have shown. Basically, our numbers, non-farm jobs, is very positive. We're about 1,000 jobs higher than we were last year. We're up to about 85,000 jobs in Whatcom County. This is about where we were right before the recession, so it's climbed steadily over this entire year. Unemployment is a low 5.4% in Whatcom County, and that's even better than the state, which is 5.7, and nationally at 5.9. So the unemployment numbers are getting better. Another thing I like to look at is the building activity. Through 9 months, September, year-to-date activity, we've processed $134 million worth of permit activity in our permit center. Now, this is projects in process, so it's not a direct correlation. It's not going to show up on the property tax rolls this year. It's a backlog, and that's the interesting part. There's a long lag time between the permit activity and when people actually come in and pay for those permits and when they turn into actual construction. But it is a long-term indicator for both jobs, property tax, sales tax, hookups in the water and sewer. So it is a good indication. Last year we did $140 million in the entire year, so we should be on track to beat that this year. Citywide revenues. Citywide revenues are down from a year ago. They were $170 million last year. They're about $160 million this year. Most of that is due to the bonds that we took out last year to pay for the wastewater treatment plant. The other thing I'd like to just point out here is that grants and entitlement, again, we have a very large work in process or a backlog of construction capital projects. A lot of this is in the street fund, but also in the sewer and water funds. And I'll talk about more about that as I get to those. On the expense side, it did $154 million. This correspondingly is down with the revenues on the expense side. You see last year the capital, this was the wastewater treatment plant capital. So this year it's back more to normal size of capital. We do about 30 to 35% of our capital backlog in any one year. And last year we exceeded that just because we were doing such a large capital project, the wastewater treatment plant. All of the other categories are basically on track, and we have small increases. So although we're down substantially because of capital, operationally we're up about $2 million or 2% over last year. Now I'll talk about the street revenues. I mentioned grants. You see this large amount of grants. We have about $18 million worth of grants in backlog. Some of that is being worked through. We're just now at September, so we're just finished the biggest months of billing. And a lot of these will carry into next year. Some of them are long lead times. We've got those bridge projects that are taking a long time. Also, Public Works had some turnover in their engineering department. We were down 2 engineers this year, so that contributed to the backlog in the Public Works departments. Street expenses reflect the same. Salaries and benefits are about even. Services and repairs have to do with some of the accounting changes. But again, most of what you see here is just the budgeted backlog here on the capital section. So we have a lot of grants, a lot of projects that will be worked through in the next year. And this is normal for the public works and streets in particular. Water revenues. Water revenues are up about $900,000 or 6% over last year.
Brian, is that because of metering?
Some to do with metering. We're converting from the unmetered to the metering down here. We also had a rate increase, and it also includes the utility tax refund that was about $250,000 in miscellaneous here. So all of those contributed to us being ahead at 9 months. On the expense side, we are increased this year. We've done more land acquisition and also capital projects through 9 months in water. So the water expenses are up about $2 million or 12%, But you see that almost all of that has to do with capital. So operationally, they were only up 1%, but overall 12% due to capital. Sewer is similar. The conversion here, as Jean mentioned, from unmetered to metered is changing our revenue streams. This makes it more seasonal, more volatility, so there'll be peaks and valleys on that. We had a very nice summer, so at the end of that we had some big billings in water and sewer, so that reflects in the revenues to date. Most of this is down from last year's. We took out a bond of $15 million, so that's what the difference is in the revenues. And it's also reflected, sorry about that, on the capital side here. Last year we did a lot of capital projects in the sewer to expand the wastewater treatment plant. That project's all done now, and we're spending down the bond proceeds on the other projects that we bonded for that. Okay. That wraps up the enterprise funds. I'll now talk briefly about the general fund revenues. This graphically shows the seasonally adjusted revenues. The two big spikes are for property taxes that we get in May and October. And then you'll see that we started out the year slightly above, but we've been trending down basically all year. I talked about this in June. Sales tax and B&O tax are the two I'm most concerned about. They've been flat year to date. And so you'll see here that right now we are below budget. This is a seasonally adjusted budget, and it's projecting out to the end of the year. And the details of that are right here. So we're about $900,000 short. And this makes the assumption that we'll collect our revenues based on the same patterns that we receive seasonally adjusted that we have for the last 5 years, and I project those forward. So property tax, we're about right on. Sales tax is flat, but business tax, we're about $370,000 below where we were and seasonally adjusted. Utility taxes also have to do with the weather patterns. We had a mild winter last January, February, March. We're just going into the cold season now. It's been a little bit later than normal. It's been a good October. The other one I'll point out here is grants and entitlements and charges. Grants, we have a big grant for $750,000 for the fireboat, so that's distorting this a little bit. That's being constructed now, and we're actually going to pay for it next spring, so we won't have to pay for that until next year. And then charges and fines and transfers. A lot of this has to do with the change in Medic 1. We went from 4 units down to 3 units, and also that money now is being remitted over to the county, so we're on a contract basis for our ambulances. So this reflects a change in the billing practices, but also reflects a change in how much we get reimbursed for those ambulance transfers. So as Medicare and Medicaid reduce their payments to us for doing that, and insurance companies do that, it's a negotiated amount, and that's a decrease. Overall, if the pattern continues, we'd be about $900,000 short on the revenue side of the general fund at the end of the year. Sales tax. Sales tax, general merchandise is our largest category. It accounts for about 17% of the total sales tax collected by the city. This has been down all year. It's actually negative 7.5% over last year. The positives are auto parts and sales, and then food and drink establishments, and then specialty trades. So right now, from September compared to last September, we are flat. No increase from last year to this year in sales tax. Yeah.
Terry,
Just
go ahead.
looking at this construction being down, going back to previous with building categories projected into the future with permits being, much higher, would you then project that we would see the construction revenue on tax and stuff correspond?
Yeah, it will turn into additional sales tax revenue in the future. Mm-hmm. Not all sales tax is, or not all construction is sales taxable, so it depends on who you're building for, if you're building for yourself or if you're building it for spec. So it's not directly correlated, but it is a good indicator. It certainly trickles down into the business tax and also employment and those numbers, so it is a positive indicator.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. General fund expenditures. We are below budget on expenditures right now, mainly in salaries and benefits. We have a number of unsigned contracts, which is contributing to that. And everything else right now is on track for the budget It's up $2.3 million or 5% over last year, but it is on budget at this point. This is the general fund expenditures by department. As I mentioned, all departments are currently below budget. We're projecting out towards the end of the year and just watching both expenses in the departments and also the fund levels to make sure that everybody maintains their expense controls and ends the year at the end of the year. Department, non-departmental, this has to do with transfers and debt service. So the budgeted number is a little bit of a timing. We have a big debt payment that happens in December, so we'll be at budget by the end of December. The last thing I need to show you is an investment portfolio. We have about $158.5 million invested. This is down from June about $5 million. It was $163 million in June. That's mainly attributable to the wastewater treatment project and the bonds. So while we took out bonds, we have 3 years to spend that money, and during that time period, it's invested. And so as the project proceeded and that matured, the bonds mature, we've been spending down that and also spending down reserves for some of the other projects. This is the makeup of that. The state investment pool is basically a cash money market account that the state invests for us. The others are municipal bonds and federal bonds or treasuries. And then this is just a comparison, the state pool. This is our portfolio returns. It's 0.82%, less than 1%. But it does beat our metrics, which is the state pool, which is paying less than 0.1%, excuse me, and also just a benchmark of other municipalities. So, any questions on the investments?
Okay, Roxanne and then Jack. Well, this is the end, isn't it?
What's that?
Any questions on investments in particular or the whole
Oh,
thing?
just in general, sorry.
I just have a question about metering. For future projections, will metering help our residents make decisions that will reduce their water use, so then would the budget go down for that?
Yes, it'll do both. So one thing, it'll increase the volatility and the seasonality of it. So there's a more of a, before it was basically a flat amount every month. Now it's going to be more variable. It is based so that you will promote savings, but at the same time that you're driving water use down, there's fixed costs. So it doesn't mean that you'll always save money on that, and the rates might have to go up correspondingly. But right now we're in a transition from the unmetered to metered, so it's a transitional time.
Thank you. Jack?
I just wanted to verify something you said. You said that the revenues were projected to be $900,000 short over the course of the entire year, but then you also said that the expenses were going to be on budget, so the net effect would be $900,000 in the red?
Well, the overall general fund deficit, budgeted deficit, is $3 million. So if the expenses come in right where they're budgeted, but we're short on the revenues, it would increase that amount.
To
We
3.9.
usually don't spend all of the expenditures. We're below on salaries and benefits because of unsettled contracts. So some of that money then will become savings at the end of the year, which will lead to a higher reserve number at the end of the year, which would mean beginning reserves would be higher next year. But we can't spend that money. We need it for settling those contracts.
Got it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Questions for Brian? Okay, thank you very much, Brian. This was information only. Next up, a resolution in support of the Bellingham Energy Efficiency Program Plan and endorsing the City of Bellingham's participation in the Georgetown University Energy Prize competition. The City of Bellingham submitted a letter of intent to participate in the Georgetown University Energy Prize in February. In June, an application to participate was submitted, and in August, the city advanced to the quarterfinals of the competition along with 51 other cities nationwide. In order to participate, we must submit an energy efficiency program plan by November 10th. This resolution endorses the efficiency plan and the city's participation in the Georgetown University Energy Prize. And I'll turn it over to our very own Mark Gardner to present to us.
Afternoon, Council. I'm here to make good on a promise that was made in September, which was to bring back a resolution for you to consider regarding the Georgetown University Energy Prize. And the timing of this is such that if you were to decide to support this, it could be included in the final plan, which is due November 10th. There's no absolute requirement that you pass this today. I realize you've not seen the entire 100% complete plan yet, but I did send you a rather ugly looking draft, which contains all the specific energy innovations that the team has put together. But before we discuss the content, I just wanted to give you a quick update of where we are and what has happened since the last presentation in September. As you know, the Energy Prize is a competition for cities with a population between 5,000 and 250,000. It's a nationwide competition. There are 51 other participants in the competition right now, and the plan to get you into the full competition is due on November 10th. So we are writing rapidly at this point. And just to review very quickly, we had convened a very competent and comprehensive leadership team for this project, including the City of Bellingham, the Bellingham School District, the two utilities, Cascade Natural Gas and Puget Sound Energy, Sustainable Connections, Resources for Sustainable Communities, and the Opportunity Council. And since then, we've been able to add one additional member for this leadership team on this project. That's the Western Washington University Institute for Energy Studies. And as you probably know, they had been involved in the project by providing an intern for the project. But a faculty member who's new to the university flew in from the East Coast, and only having been here a short time, quickly met with some of us involved in the plan and was wholeheartedly behind it, and so he's been participating in that team. So we now have 8 different organizations represented in the team. And since September is when we've really been able to assemble both the whole group and the working groups to work through the ideas for the plan and develop a list of plan elements. So we've met once with the entire leadership group and twice with specific working groups to focus on residential and school district conservation in the last 6 weeks or so. And the plan itself, as I mentioned, it's not 100% complete. There's quite a few elements that are required by the prize that are in the draft stages, but the plan that we've come up with in terms of action items basically describes Bellingham's energy efficiency delivery infrastructure and includes 16 elements for planned enhancements of that infrastructure. Most of the elements build off of existing efforts. We've got a tremendous infrastructure already in place. I've been personally amazed at, for example, the incentives and rebates you can get from utilities and even from the city itself. In fact, when I'm done writing this, I'm going to be calling them up and getting some of those freebies myself. Other things like the Community Energy Challenge, we're really very far along in terms of having that infrastructure there. But like anything, no matter how well designed, there's always much, much more you can do to increase participation. So a lot of what the plan does is it develops outreach and educational efforts to really accelerate the use of what we do have in place. There's a good bit of description about planned capital investments and focusing both on the city and the school district. Initially, we thought we might be disadvantaged because we've done a lot of our capital stuff early, but the more we get into this, we realize there's a couple of good things that we can really benefit from that will be coming online pretty soon. In this plan, as I mentioned, most things are building off of the existing infrastructure and activities, but there's some elements we put in as somewhat speculative, so we didn't lose the idea, but they remain to be fully vetted. For example, there was the idea of trying to get a community energy center up and running in the city that would provide basically a showroom of energy efficiency equipment and appliances that people could walk in, and we could use that to help strengthen all kinds of other things that are already happening around efficiency. So that's just one idea that obviously would require quite a bit of additional work. But the Institute for Energy Studies at Western has said they might be able to staff that with paid student staff. So that's an interesting commitment that has been made, at least speculatively. So we've got quite a bit of good stuff happening in this plan, and as I mentioned, you've gotten a list. So if you're comfortable in supporting the resolution, you may do so. But I'm here to ask any question, or answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. Any questions or comments from council members? Pinky, and then Michael.
Well, it's no secret that I'm really supportive and very, very excited about this. I'm supporting it wearing both hats, doing a lot of work on this in my other job as well. So I think it's an opportunity for us to be a national leader in energy efficiency and show what a wonderful small community can do when they all collaborate and they do this together. And it's just another reason for us to be proud of the city of Bellingham. So I'm completely supportive of us participating.
Great. Michael?
I'm going to first ask if Pinky wants to make the motion. I think you deserve it. No, I'll do after.
I move Michael make no comment. No, just kidding.
I move that we support the resolution to support the Bellingham Energy Efficiency participation in the GWEP Prize.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Michael?
This is a really important but small step I think the council can take. As Mark's outlined, most of the work will be done by our partners and the city staff. So I think we should do this. And I'm particularly excited to hear about Western's Institute for Energy Studies. Is that the name of it?
Yes.
Because we were already relying upon their expertise, and it sounds like that's going to even be a stronger source for us to lean on. I do have one question. There's no one here from Public Works, unfortunately, but there was ideas recently that we could be changing out our city street lights to LED
Except for
street
Fritz,
lights.
actually.
Well, Fritz. Okay. So the speculation has to do with how quickly we could transition away from our current street lighting systems, which are probably lower energy than the olden days. But LED lighting was much, much lower. I know the Port of Bellingham changed out hundreds of street lights, I think, in the airport, and they're seeing cost savings. It's a big investment. It's in the millions to do citywide, but, you know, I'm wondering if we could do part of the city within the 2-year time frame and start to see some of those savings, knowing full well we can't complete it. So hello. I see our Public Works Director. Would you mind talking about the feasibility of any of that street light upgrading being done within the 2-year time frame?
Yes, Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. The city's currently working with the Washington State through their General Administration Department, very similar to what we did when we did the energy efficiency upgrades of the municipal buildings. We've applied for a grant from the Department of Commerce to help us. We think that we'll be successful in that. And then we do anticipate moving forward on a street lighting upgrading project that would probably happen within the 15-16 biennium. That's our anticipation. We think that will happen. We don't have the funding source entirely identified for that. The grant from Ecology would not, or from Commerce would not pay for that project in its entirety. Obviously, there'll be significant energy savings that would help offset any funding source. So we do think we'll get that done within the 2-year period.
Very cool. Thanks, Ted. Any other questions or comments from council members? Terry?
Just a comment. I'm excited that we're doing this, but at the same time, I really wished we could use the retroactive projects that we've done, because we have done so much more than many cities already. And I hate the term low-hanging fruit, but we've done that already, and so we won't be able to, do some of the easier projects that some of our competitors will maybe be doing. And so that,
That's true.
So it's going to make it much harder for us because we've already done so much already.
Go ahead, Pinky.
That was definitely a consideration in going forth, but we do have some advantages that some other cities don't. They might be starting from the ground up. However, as a city and a community, we have all been working together a lot longer. So with the Community Energy Challenge, with the utilities, with different organizations, and with the city, we've had a partnership way before lots of these other cities have ever even considered these kind of initiatives. And I can tell you what the steps were to make that happen over the last couple of years, and the forming and the norming of all those organizations. It is labor intensive, and they're going to spend a lot more time doing and developing a lot before they can even attack some of these projects. And because we're already ahead of the game, yes, we've already done some efficiency, but we can take bigger steps together because we already have all of this community collaboration. So I think we have an advantage.
Yeah, I'm with you, Pinky. Anacortes, you can take as long as you want. It's okay. And I'm not gonna brag, but I'm gonna bring up here, this one, whereas past energy campaigns in Bellingham have been successful and have resulted in, for example, Bellingham being named the nation's #1 green power community by the EPA in 2007. That was actually quite a long time ago. Right. And part of the real genesis of all of the work that has been happening in the last 7 years. And I agree, Pinky, I think we're going to just catapult up into another realm entirely, actually, on our energy efficiency as a community. And that was my first real project in Bellingham, so that was really fun. It's nice to see this moving forward. Anything else folks want to add before we vote?
I just wanted
Pinky?
I just wanted to add one last thing, is that this is all going to be beneficial no matter what happens, but I think that there is a very strong possibility that we could be we could either win the prize or be the top contenders, and know that $5 million in energy efficiency is what would be awarded to the city, and the things that we could do for our city would be outstanding. So I just want to encourage everyone to support when things come towards you. Get involved. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, when we win, we will spend $5 million, and it will be fun. And we will do good with it. Yes, exactly. And if we ever do that cool community center with energy efficiency stuff, maybe we can have some Lake Whatcom information there, because everybody needs a dishwasher or a laundry machine or something, and then they can pop by. We can achieve some other things at the same time. Okay, seeing nothing else from anybody up here, long-winded people who have a long evening ahead of them, all those in favor of passing this resolution in support of the Bellingham Energy Efficiency Program Plan and endorsing our participation in the Georgetown University Energy Prize competition, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Last up, before we go into our budget session, we have a very interesting, I'm sure, presentation about our waterfront, a status update on the waterfront district implementation. Staff will provide a status report on a number of projects the City of Bellingham is leading in the waterfront district. This is information only, and we're welcoming Tara Sundin, and looks like Amy Cram as well.
Good afternoon, Tara Sundin with the Planning and Community Development Department. We have a couple items to update you on today. We've got Amy Cram here with her project management hat on from the legal department. She is our project manager on a number of cleanups in the waterfront district, and she'll give you some updates on a few of those. And we also have James King here representing the Parks Department, and specifically want to talk to you about the historic icons. If you recall, when we adopted, or when you authorized the execution of the interlocal agreement, there were a couple of icons identified. One was the tile tanks that we all see from around our downtown. And then the others were the digesters. Those are pieces of equipment inside the tallest building on the site. And so we have a recommendation for you today. The port has given us notice that they plan to demolish the digester building, and it gave us and the agreement gives us 6 months to make a decision on those, and we have a recommendation for you, and we'll be seeking some direction from you on that. Before I turn it over to Amy, I wanted to give you a little update on how things are progressing with Harcourt. I checked in with Rob Fix, and Harcourt and the port are still negotiating. They had hoped that they would complete those negotiations by the end of this month. But we know how complicated a deal like this is, and so he's indicated that the meat of the agreement has been fleshed out, but they are still working on some of the exhibits. Those exhibits are important exhibits. One specifically that he referenced was the schedule of development. So those are still important deal factors. How quickly is Harcourt going to proceed? What does success look like? So those are really important things that we want, obviously, the port and Harcourt to get right. So he indicated a positive feeling and vibe about what things are, how things are progressing, but they will be needing a couple more months. So he's thinking probably likely by the end of the year that agreement will be made public. He also shared with me that Harcourt, the first kind of development action that they are planning on is redevelopment of the Greenery building. So whenever development comes up, that is something that they plan to do right out of the gates if all goes well. So I wanted to report that to you. This schedule has required some modifications to the timing of the delivery of Greenery and Blodell. The city has stopped spending money on design of that piece of infrastructure, and we've let the port know that we don't want to keep spending money on design until we have a developer on board, and that's requiring us to extend. If you recall, there's a trigger. Every investment that we make has kind of a trigger for us making that investment. In the case of Greenery Blodell, we were given 24 months to begin construction on that arterial after the interlocal was approved, and we are extending that by 6 months to give the port this time to finish their negotiations. So I wanted to give you that update.
Jack?
The administration's extending it, or is this a council action?
This is an administrative. There's a major modification and a minor modification, and we've determined with legal that this would constitute a minor modification. It's not impacting their ability to develop something or our ability to secure funding. So,
how many extensions would you do before it becomes something that the council would look at as a major modification?
I would have to discuss that again with legal.
Okay.
So I'm going to turn this over to Amy to talk about the cleanups.
Good afternoon, Amy Cram, Legal Department. I'm going to briefly go over 3 of the waterfront sites and just give you an update as to where we are, and feel free to interrupt or wait till the end with questions, whatever you like. First off is the Haley site. Is the And just to let you know what's happened this year and what is continuing to happen is we've been working on the remedial investigation and feasibility study. The remedial investigation is completed and waiting for its partner, the feasibility study, which is the part of the document that has the alternatives and eventually a preferred alternative listed. And that will be complete by the end of this year. We're hoping to be able to go out for public comment in December or January. And if that happens on time, the 2015 activities would be a public comment period for the RIFS as one document. Then moving on to the consent decree, which has as its main exhibit the cleanup action plan, and construction in 2016 or 2017 or both, coordinated with the Cornwall Avenue landfill site cleanup. And that brings us to the Cornwall landfill, where the port is managing the cleanup, but the city is playing a supporting role in reviewing all documentation and weighing in on decision making. The 2014 activities were that the cleanup action plan was completed. The consent decree is being entered into court this week. It's been signed by the city and the port and the Department of Natural Resources and Ecology. It's on its way to Ecology to sign, and it will get entered. And that means that engineering and design work can officially begin. There's been some pre-work done, but now it can begin in earnest. And in 2015 and 16, we'll be completing the engineering and design, going for permitting, and then coordinating with the Haley site for construction. And the city is not directly involved as a potentially liable party for GP West, but because it's part of our waterfront redevelopment area, I thought I would just give you an idea of what's happening. 2014, the site was divided into two different remedial action units. The pulp and tissue unit has had its cleanup action plan, and the consent decree is now moving along, and that will allow for design and engineering to be completed in 2015. Concurrent with that, the other part of the site, which is the chlor-alkali remedial action unit, will have its feasibility study, consent decree, and cleanup action plan all going out for public review. And the pulp and tissue remedial action unit will hopefully be under construction in 2015. I spoke with the port recently to determine whether the schedule was accurate, because this is what has been published, and they feel that it is very realistic. 2016 completion of the pulp and tissue RAU construction, and then also the beginning or possibly the entire chlor-alkali construction. Any questions?
Amy, with these cleanups, are all stakeholders on board with this particular plan? Outside of the public comment?
I'm sorry, are you grouping all three of the ones I've discussed together?
Well,
or?
I'm thinking about, in particularly, the lamination. Are they on board with this particular plan?
The way, I do not know whether the lamination has commented to date on the GP West cleanup. Typically, the way that the lamination weighs in on these projects is when the JARPA, when the permit goes out, the federal agencies have an obligation to consult with the tribes, and not just the lamination, but any tribe that has usual and custom fishing rights in this area. That usually has to do well, for UNA, it would have to do with in-water construction work, and I believe that this work is being done on the upland, so I don't know if there would be an interface for permitting, and I don't know whether there has been any comment made on prior documents by the lamination on GP West. On Cornwall, there were comments made on the RIFS that went out as one document, and there were some objections to the basis for the land mass existing, and I can't remember whether there were specific objections to the investigation itself or the proposed alternative, but the underlying issue, as I recall, was that the land that was formed by various fill activities should not be there anymore. RG Haley has not had a public process that has been weighed in on by the lamination to date, though we have been interfacing whenever we have done any sort of work out there. When we conducted the interim action in 2013, we had representatives from the lamination at several meetings so that we could let them know what was going on, and they appeared to be in support of the interim action and did not object.
Okay. And are you aware of any other tribes that might have fishing rights in that area outside of the lamination?
There are definitely other tribes that do. I don't know what the full list is. I believe the Nooksack and possibly the Swinomish. And the agencies, when reviewing the permits, have a duty to inform all of the tribes that they know of with UNA there.
Okay, thank you.
I can turn it over to James.
Okay, James King, Parks and Recreation Department. So the historic icons, as you remember, when we were going through the sub-area plan was an issue that came up, and in the facilities interlocal agreement, we agreed to have further discussions about what we were going to try and save into the future. So the two big items to talk about are the ceramic tanks there in the left-hand side of the picture there, and then also the digester tanks, which are inside the digester building, and that's the large building in the upper right-hand corner of the picture there. So the port has given us notice, as Tara said, that we need to make a decision as to whether we want to try, we being the city, want to try and save those digester tanks. So for those of you who haven't been in the building, this is what they look like from the bottom. They're huge tanks that go all the way from the bottom of that building to the top if you include the funnels that feed them. They're large steel tanks riveted together, huge in that building. So when we looked at these, we went out, first of all, again, and went through the building and tried to imagine how these would look out in the open. If we were to put them in a park there, what would it look like? Is it something that would be appealing that people would like to look at? So we had that discussion. We also looked at and had a consultant look at what would it take to restore them and to protect them. There are some challenges with them. They're covered with lead paint, so they would have to be completely stripped down and repainted. There's a lining on the inside that would have to be removed. They're integral to the building, particularly to the foundation of the building. And so if we were to save them in place, you'd have to save a significant portion of the building's foundation, which might be challenging. Also, the third thing that we're not sure about is we know they're on wood pilings for a foundation. We aren't sure of the condition of those because those pilings are buried in the concrete foundation of the building. So it would be fairly expensive to save one. One tank alone would cost about $500,000 to save. And the other key to that is to stabilize it so that it meets seismic codes, so that it doesn't tip over. The last thing we want to do is put a tank like this in the middle of a park with a chain link fence around it. So the next thing that I want to cover is the tile tanks. And we've looked at these several different times, and consultants have looked at them. And these are, as you guys know, this is what people see and what they know. They've been there for a long time. When people talk about historic icons on the waterfront, this is what they talk about. The tile tanks, to stabilize them, is approximately $700,000 to $1 million. Again, they have the same challenge. They're on wooden pilings. We don't know the condition of those pilings. We'd have to look at that. The actual grade in this area of the waterfront is going to come up some, so you'd have to deal with a grade coming up. So just to stabilize them so that they don't fall over would be that $700,000 to $1 million. Then one of the challenges is the tiles are in danger of falling off on the outside. And it's very expensive to stick them back on. The solution is actually to use screws. And that's about an $800,000 process to get that and the roofs and everything else stabilized on them so that people could walk up and touch them. And then, again, there wasn't a chain link fence around them keeping people away from them. I think the other interesting thing that's come up a lot lately is the reuse of them, the possible reuse of them for district infrastructure, particularly water storage. So that's interesting, and there would be some additional cost to that beyond just stabilizing them, but interesting to think about reuse in that way. And the estimates are that would save about $500,000 versus creating new tanks for that type of infrastructure. And if you have further questions about that, I know Fritz is here from Public Works that could help answer some of those questions. So staff recommendations. As we took a hard look at these, and what do we really want left down there? How do we protect enough so that it represents the history of what's happened on this site, but yet don't get so much that we can't take care of it, that we can't keep up with the painting, or that we have to put chain link fences around it to protect it. So our recommendation is number one, to focus on the tile tanks. That's what people see, that's what they know. Let's focus on protecting and preserving those so that people could enjoy those and keep that connection. The digester tanks, many or most people don't know what they look like. I've never seen them because they're inside a building. And because, again, as we're balancing funding and how do we build streets and infrastructure and parks and trails and all the things that we're committed as a city to build, how do we balance that out? And we feel like the digester tanks are not worth saving for that purpose, that it's just too expensive to save that type of infrastructure.
James?
Yes.
That's not a digester tank.
So,
What about that?
Yep, let me get to that. So that's my next point. There are other neat historic items on the site, this included. This is the ball. I probably shouldn't mention what people call it, but acid was stored in it, so it's the acid ball.
Oh, yeah, let's save that.
But it shows that neat construction, same as the digester tanks, of these huge steel panels that are riveted together. So it saves a piece of that history so we can look at it. It's relative. You can see there's a person standing. In fact, that might be me standing underneath it. But you can see the scale. It's still large and exciting, but it's probably not going to fall over in an earthquake. We don't have the infrastructure costs to build a foundation for it. Yes, it's going to cost some money to strip the lead paint and repaint it, and it also has a liner in it. So there, there would be some costs, but much, much less than protecting one of the digester tanks. So our recommendation is to save this, maybe save some of the other historic items that are down there, such as the cutter head from the wood chipper. It's this huge wheel that would be kind of neat to incorporate into a park and make a feature. There may be some other interesting things down there that could become part of sculpture or part of the park in different ways, but not have that risk and that cost associated with the digester tanks. So in summary, our recommendation is to save the tile tanks, focus on that, both for aesthetic purposes and also the possibility of reuse. Not save the digester tanks, but save this ball and other smaller, less expensive items for the future. So we're looking for your direction on that recommendation.
James, maybe I missed this. How many digester tanks are there?
There are five, if I remember right. And they start on one end of the building on I guess that's the north end of the building with the oldest tanks. And the first three, I believe, are the older ones. And then there's two newer ones that are on the other end of the building. And if you haven't been in the building, it's impressive. They fill that building up from top to bottom.
Yeah, it's all tanks in there, yeah. Tara and then Michael and Jack.
Just want to clarify that today, what we need, you guys, the council doesn't have to make a decision on keeping the tile tanks or what we're going to do with the acid ball. The port's not, all that's going to be left there for us. The piece that we need to make a decision on is the digester tanks. And the administration's prepared to let the port know that we aren't planning on keeping those tanks, but so the direction that we would need from you is if it's counter to that direction that we're presenting. Does that?
Okay.
I'm good.
Michael?
So focusing on the digesters, they're awesome but dangerous structures because they're so tall. And I can give up on the idea of saving them in their entirety or even all of them. And I've only seen, actually, with my eyes, the bottom part of them. I'm wondering if in the demolition process we might not be able to save portions of the digester tanks about at the same scale as the acid ball or the cutter head. I think using those large, huge, iconic pieces of steel will be an asset to creating a sense of place and history for the work that has gone on this waterfront in the future. Have you discussed the possibility of, as they're being demolished, saving significant, large, iconic portions of them? You know, a 40-foot base as opposed to a 100-foot tower?
So,
Or just knock it over on its side?
They really are impressive, and they will be demolished and they will be cut up.
They are impressive, and I agree. They're kind of neat to look at in that building, and we have discussed, could you save portions of them? We've talked to the port about that a little bit. Part of what will make that decision is how the contractor chooses to dismantle that building and dismantle those tanks. Can they save a piece of them? We've had that discussion. Port staff have indicated, yeah, possibly you could. There may be a cost to it, or there would be a cost to it. So that's, I think, as they get a contractor on board, we could certainly have that discussion. But again, we'd have to attach that cost of how much would it cost to save a portion of it.
Well, personally, I would like us to keep looking at that possibility. I think we are in danger of losing a great deal of our, like I said, it's our sense of place and our sense of history for the people who've worked down there and the lives that have been led here for decades. So I'd like us to keep that possibility alive.
Jack?
I'm really confused. When did it get to a point where the port has now foisted financial responsibility on us saving these things that they have been really kind of forcing down our throats to go and preserve, such as these tile tanks, towers, this thing here, which I think is very unusual, and it's certainly worthy of being preserved, but the port has always said that they would go and do it. How did it get to be the city's financial responsibility to do any of this?
The interlocal agreement that was approved in December of 13, along with all of the planning documents, it was during that time as we were negotiating that agreement with the port that the port made it clear to us and that they did not plan to spend money on these icons. There's only two specifically mentioned in the document, and how it's worded is both the tile tanks and the digester tanks are located on property which will become commercial green, so it's in that stretch of real estate there. And it's worded such that the port is to remove all artifacts before giving that property to the city unless we choose to keep them. So it was back at that time. But we are not required to, and we're not required to do anything with the acid ball or any of those pieces.
I mean, this whole street grid layout system was all predicated on these ceramic tanks, the silos, being where they were, and the port just really, really arguing hard. And yes, they look cool, but are they worth the millions of dollars that we'd be spending and trying to refurbish them, or trying to make them stable, or trying to make them fit with 10 to 15 feet worth of fill in that area? And how would that look then? Would they still look the same as they do now? To me, it just seems, and now we have tiles that are falling off or potentially falling off. Why don't we go and save the tiles and make a little yellow brick road through the whole area and call it good and not really use it for anything else? This whole idea of these icons compared to adaptive reuse of real buildings, the true adaptive reuse of buildings and not icons. I mean, the icon that we have right now, we just talked about earlier today, which is the outfall of the ASB. That's our icon. That's the thing that we can go and promote to say what Georgia Pacific's commitment to this community is, you know, in the Koch brothers. You know, they won't go and let us build a trail there, but, you know, we're going to go and preserve this, you know, these items here. I don't know.
Kathy?
Yes, go ahead, Mayor Kelly.
The reason that you're having this discussion now is exactly the debate that you are engaging in, Jack. The port wanted to take them all down, and they didn't want to spend a penny on them.
Not the tile tanks, though.
Actually,
They will.
yeah. So what I would say is, this is the council's opportunity, and at that time, it was the council's decision to delay that decision until now, when they want to take them down. So that is very appropriate for you to be negotiating this, but it was to give the council, at their request, the flexibility to make that decision, not at the time we were doing the interlocal, but now when people have a chance to think about it. So we're not obliged to do anything right now.
Okay, so, and
It's a choice that the council can make.
let's be clear, you are requesting direction on the digesters only, if we have direction for you. The other items can be more over time that we discuss. Okay. Michael, and then Terry?
Unfortunately, this isn't quite digester focused, but can I go ahead anyway?
Sure, and then I might rein us back to the
Okay,
digesters.
well, it does have to do with iconic structures, potentially the lower half of a digester. There, I tied it together. You know, I would think if I was the owner of this property and I was trying to maximize its future attractiveness and its future developability, I would definitely consider keeping those. And I wonder what, for example, Harcourt's thinking. Is there any other private developer? I mean, these are irreplaceable things that go on postcards that draw visitors in the future. I mean, you don't want, I can't imagine it being considered wise to build anywhere USA on the Bellingham waterfront. Harcourt, one of their, you know, claims to fame is the Titanic District, which is a shipyard where the Titanic was built, and they kept its historic character. They used what they could to make the Titanic District, not just anywhere England. So I'm afraid of this being driven forward as anywhere USA, and I would hope that the port doesn't want anywhere USA. I really hope that's true. And anyway, I hope we can save many of these iconic structures for that reason.
Yeah. You were talking about the tiles, the tile ceramic?
I was mostly talking about the digesters being one of those, part of the digesters being one of those iconic elements that I would like us to continue to try to.
Well, I like your idea of maintaining the attempt to use pieces of them at least. Terry?
Yeah, well, I think we don't, if we agree with the administrations, we don't have to take any action, so we don't have to make any motion. And I do agree at this point with those. But I do look forward to discussion on saving this tank. This is a piece of art. I mean, done right, situated right, that, and the tile tanks. They're much like the lost tiled silos in certain parts of the farm country. I mean, they are a very historic piece, and when you see them from the water and other kind of stuff, I mean, yes, it might cost something, but a whole lot less than something sometimes if you're commissioning public art pieces, because these are public art pieces and can be. And so I would really look forward to having that discussion, because I really think those things should be saved as part of that. But other than that, I think we take no action, let the mayor's action stand. And
Kathy?
Yes, Mayor Kelly?
And then I think what I've heard, and it makes sense, is when other buildings on the waterfront were dismantled, the crews that came in to take the buildings down, the office buildings and stuff, they did try to save fixtures and whatever they could out of the buildings. So I think it's perfectly appropriate if we'd like to say, we're not going to keep these intact because we don't know how to make them safe, or we don't want to pay to make them safe, that they be taken down in a way that we could use them or salvage them or something, in addition to the pieces that are going to be easier to put into the site. So I don't think it's an either-or proposition necessarily.
Pinky, and then Jack, and then Jean?
Then Jill? No, just kidding.
I support the motion of the staff's recommendation. I would like for us to have an opportunity when they are doing destruction to have a professional photographer take pictures of them so that we do have some sort of record of what was in there, and we can maybe highlight that in the building somewhere. I also like the idea of using part of the tanks to maybe integrate it into art structures or however we could salvage it, but I think that's the smart way to use our money.
Jack?
I guess, Mayor, you brought up about the other items that the port has been kind of salvaging out of some of the other buildings. I guess I get back to this whole situation is, what are we paying for? Are we going to pay for them to go and have it displayed, those items? Again, this was never on, this particular feature here was never on the thing. Is this considered a digester tank?
An acid ball.
It's an acid ball that was completely outside of the whole thing. So how did this get on our radar as far as our financial obligations to go in and pay for that? I mean, I agree that particular structure should be preserved, but how did it get to our budget and not the port's budget?
So I can respond to that a little bit. We took a hard look at it, and part of what I presented to you was the bigger picture today. The decision is about the digesters today. All of the rest of the decisions are down the road. But we wanted to share the bigger picture, that we were looking at what types of things we wanted to save that we thought would represent what it used to look like down there. So that's why this ball is on there, to say, hey, we are interested in this. When the building comes down, it's right next to the building. It probably needs to be moved so that it doesn't get damaged while they take the building down.
So are you suggesting that the city pay for the relocation of that while the digester buildings are unfortunately destroyed?
I would hope we don't pay to move it, but we would pay to restore it. But
We would.
I think we don't have those details worked out with the port. They've basically said, we're responsible for the historic icons.
So for our purposes today, how about we schedule a discussion about this conversation that we are wanting to have for another time? But right now, we focus on the digester question. Does anyone disagree with the staff recommendation? And we can ask to have this further conversation at another meeting in the next few weeks or months. So it's going to come up again, clearly. Michael?
Does today's digester decision relate to possible salvage of the bricks of the digester building?
Do you want it to?
There's been a lot of talk about those special custom bricks and their reuse potential, if not as a whole. I mean, those are custom-made historic bricks. They're very unusual.
Okay.
If not as direct building materials, then as something pottycrete-like, I don't know. I fear that the port will do what they've done in the past, which is basically throw away things that they had first indicated they might be saving for reuse.
Okay. Jack?
Yeah, in direct response to what you're saying, Michael, is that in the past, we have been given promises that there would be reuse of the bricks, and what we found out after the fact was that they were sent to the construction landfill out on, Axton Road. So that wasn't very much in the way of reuse, and it's really unfortunate. You know, we got these piles of rubble out there right now that are going to be used as base for whatever material fill. But that's not adaptive reuse either, or any type of reuse. It's just, you know, it's fill. I do want to give a little bit of an attaboy to the port, though. I feel like after 10 years that they finally understood the message that they should go, and on the second story of the granary building, they finally went and boarded up the windows that were destroying the building. I am a little perplexed about the fact that up on the tower, they still have, you know, there's still, you know, tonight it's going to rain, tomorrow it's going to really rain, and the building's still going to get wet inside those, you know, inside those open, broken windows up there. But at least the second story is finally done after 10 years. But I don't know. This whole thing really, as you can tell, really gets me frustrated. But
yeah, parts of what Jack was saying I agree with. I think it's, you know, I think we need to move on with this. Do we really want to spend millions of dollars on some of these things? You know, that whole waterfront has 150, 200 years of iterations where there's not much left of the fishing industry down there, and that's what it was many, many years ago. I find it perplexing, not from you council members, but I find it perplexing from some of the citizens out in the community who want to have remnants of a mill that they wanted to get the hell out of town. That doesn't make any sense to me. So if it's just me alone, I'd say rip everything down, let's get started on something else. But I don't mind going along with getting rid of the digesters and taking a look. But if the price tag comes back way too high, if you want to take pictures and put up a museum or whatever, but this back and forth, no, we want to tear this down, no, we don't want to tear it down, I think we need to move on. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time arguing about what's left there. That's over with now. It's time to move on. So,
so do you need further direction from us, like it's okay what the mayor and staff have recommended, however, any possibility to find interesting things and reuse them, we would like the opportunity to discuss us paying for that if that's what it required, but don't do it without.
I think as we move forward with the port and any decisions that are made, we always can do that. I mean, I mentioned to Rob about boarding the windows up, and it happened. I'm sorry that all the windows didn't get boarded up, but I think that we still are working together to try to make sure that what is left down there that we want to use is usable. And we haven't made, as James said, a determination about all the other things. I would just say that if the city chooses to save something, or there's something that the city wants, that probably the port would expect the city to pay for it, since the port is willing to take it down.
Right.
So that would be, I guess, what I'd say, and I think the council responded to citizen comments as we were going through this process about the concern about what was going to happen with the icons. So if you just want to say, we're not going to save the digesters right now, but as they're taken down, we'd like to see if there's any value to the parts.
Yes.
Then I can easily say that to the
Okay,
port.
let's say that. Pinky?
And maybe add the contingent if we could somehow have adaptive reuse for the bricks, if that's at all possible. I'd like for that to be part of the conversation.
That's a conversation I've already had with them, because I know, talking to Jack on previous discussions, that was important to him.
Okay. Jack, and then we're going to try and move on.
I strongly disagree about it doing anything damaging to the digester building.
Okay.
I find that it has tremendous potential of being reused as a building, and that there are just, you know, because of the way that the plans were set up, the street grid, and because of what people's inherent interest of wanting to, you know, just blow out everything on the ground, including that building, I just feel like it's a missed opportunity, and I think our community is really, I think, going to be regretting that in the future, just as much as we regret now a lot of the school buildings that we've torn down over the last 100 years that would be really cool buildings if we would have at least had a little bit of wisdom and courage to go and make them reusable into into another building that the community could use. And that one specifically has a lot of potential.
Okay. Looks like there isn't anything else. I'm just going to say, I think 50 to 100 years from now, people will care. Nobody will know what a digester was or an acid ball. Well, they might still know what that is, but I'm glad we are having these conversations. It's really important for placemaking, and it's important for placemaking because historical context gives us context as people in a community. And we're trying to do that, so I appreciate the conversation we're having, even when we do disagree. Sounds like that's it on this presentation. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move into our last item this afternoon, which is a work session on the 2015-2016 biennial budget. The remaining city departments will present their biennial budgets. Human Resources, Public Facilities District, Hearing Examiner, Parks and Recreation, Planning and Community Development, Library, Public Works, Fire, and Information Technology. This proposed schedule is tentative and subject to change as time allows. I assume we will not get through all of these in the next few hours. Yes, Terry?
So are we going to come back and then do approval of minutes in old and new business? Because those are still on the agenda.
That's a good
And so
point.
either we move those up or we have to come back after this.
We
to
can do
them.
those right now, and we did add an executive session, but we can do that after the work session, and I only have to come back and then reconvene us, and you can all leave from there. So sure, let's do older new business and approval of minutes now. Thanks, Terry. So I believe we have one set of minutes, which are for October 13th. Actually, it says I have October 20th budget meeting minutes, too. Are those in the same packet, Marie, do you know?
There were two
Oh,
separate.
okay, yes, they're together. Okay, thanks.
Move approval.
Second.
Of,
Both
we
of
need
them.
to split.
We can split them, yeah. Move approval of the afternoon minutes.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for approving minutes from the committee meetings on October 13th. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
I'm abstaining.
Jack abstains, so minutes pass 6-0 with one abstention. And I'll entertain a motion for the minutes from the special budget meeting on October 20th.
Approval?
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, minutes pass 7-0. Is there any old or new business? Terry?
Yeah, I just want to mention, I went to the 40th anniversary celebration from the EMS system, and it was a really good program. It was a great presentation. They had films of interviews of people, survivors of the EMS system who, talked about their experiences and things, and it was
Say what EMS is.
the Emergency Medical Services System. And great speakers. It was a really good community celebration, and so I just wanted to mention it. It's a pretty important anniversary, 40 years. It's a long time that we've had working on a unified system.
That is cool. Thanks, Terry.
Yeah.
Any other old or new business? Roxanne?
I just want to remind everyone to vote. Be sure to turn in your ballot. Don't forget, November 4th deadline.
Tuesday, November 4th.
I'm glad you brought that up, but if I see another commercial on the 42nd District Senate race, I'm going to break the television. And I'm going to take my cold home.
Better turn it off for a while, Gene. Okay, so we're going to adjourn to this work session in the mayor's boardroom. It's open to the public, so anyone who wants to join